Morning. It's 24th of February. Yes, and Frank was asking if it's recording, and I request that you speak up a little louder so it'll catch it on the.
Well, somebody said that?
No, I'm just assuming that it was so quiet for me, I hardly heard it. And so we only have 4 more days left of this month. They go by fast. We're starting today at Genesis 4:12. We discussed last week about Cain being warned about that he was about to sin if he could that he could master that.
Right.
That was his responsibility. He didn't, and he murdered his brother. So God has a punishment for him. He says, if you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. It seems that to have been later remitted as Cain became the founder of the first city. The Hebrew word for punishment, avoni, may also be translated as my sin, suggesting that Cain was unable to bear the guilt he felt for killing his brother. So there are 2 equally valid translations given different interpretations or meanings. That came from Dennis Prager. I never thought about that. I didn't know avoni meant my sin. There's another word for sin besides avoni. We see again that we started out at the garden. Adam sinned. Now he's put outside the garden, but it's not very far from where the garden was.
Yeah.
Here, he's going to wander.
Not Adam, no, Cain. Not Adam.
Yeah, Cain. This is interesting because I always thought, why didn't God give him the death penalty like is given in the Torah? Mm-hmm. And Prager has a comment on that I never thought of before. But let's deal with his punishment and his guilt. Since you have banished me this day from the soil, and I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth, anyone who meets me may kill me. So now he realizes that he sinned, and he's afraid that somebody's going to want to hurt him because of it. So the Lord said to him, I promise, if anyone kills Cain, 7-fold vengeance shall be taken on him. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who met him should kill him. So now Cain is met, a mark is put on him to keep something bad from happening to him. And we will find that word, when God marks us, that's his purpose, is to keep something bad from happening.
Why would God not want something bad to happen to Cain after he did?
Okay, now we're coming to the idea. First of all, let's say Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod. There's 2 things happening here. As mankind sins another sin, he gets further away from God, and now God is becoming hidden to him. I just heard a video on this week, a rabbi's teaching on why is God hidden from us. And this shows us the steps to why God is hidden from us. It's because of our sin. And of course, we've mentioned this before. Every time we do something that is outside the will of God, it clouds our neshama and we can't see God. He's hidden from us. So this is another step for mankind away from God's presence. Now, why did God let him go without getting the death penalty? That's the question. Is that what you asked?
Yeah, well, why would he protect Cain from being hurt? It's almost like he was honoring Cain. So.
All right. Now, this is what Dennis Prager says, and I can see what he's saying. This is the first time somebody has killed someone. And he's saying that when God warned him of sin, he didn't say, you're about to kill your brother. So Cain didn't know the result of his anger would end up in murdering. So it wasn't premeditated.
It wasn't?
Well, not premeditated murder, because he didn't know that's what would happen to him. Okay? So the law later given to Moses, you are only under the death penalty if you premeditated your murder. And he's saying that Cain did not premeditate this.
And there had to be 3 witnesses.
There had to be 2 or 3 witnesses that saw it and could testify that you did it, as well as someone understanding that it was premeditated, something to prove that it was premeditated. So it's difficult to get the death penalty in Judaism. In fact, it's very, very difficult. There's very few people that get the death penalty here. So God is now protecting him. But we see some things that happened that shows it's not such a good idea. So Cain left the presence of Hashem and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Nod means a place that you don't know about. It's way away. It's a long ways away.
Okay.
Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Now, Enoch is a word for comfort.
Oh. Huh.
It's the same word that we get on Seth's line later on.
Okay.
Hanok.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to deal with who you married, because it doesn't tell us. So he founded a city and named the city after his son Enoch. Now it gives some more of his line until it gets down to Lamech. And then Lamech has...
And what about this? He became a city builder.
Well, I was going to say, because of several things that happens, this is the beginning of civilization. And this
doesn't mean that cities are necessarily a good thing.
Well, I want to talk about that because it looks that way. But really, okay, let's say it now. Really, these things are not bad. What's bad is if our heart is bad.
Yeah.
So if you have a city that is full of warmongers and wild people, it's going to be a bad city.
Where does the mafia live?
In the city. Well, it's easy to concentrate your evilness in a crowd.
Yeah.
But the same holds true if you're righteous. You could have a very righteous city.
Yeah.
So the city itself is not what's bad. It's what is in the hearts of the people that live in the city.
I just wonder if, in some ways, if the whole focus on working the ground and so forth, and agriculture and gardens and so forth, if that wasn't more the ideal, than the city where people gather together and try to...
I think the implication is for mankind who tends towards sin instead of righteousness. So I was saying, in the Psalms and in other places, it says the humble are left in the land when God brings punishment or allows the people to be taken out or whatever.
Well, this happened when Babylon came in and destroyed the temple. It said those that were left were the poor.
That's right. And they're usually the farmers. They live out of the cities and they're working the ground. And so they're called the humble people. And they usually are not getting into the kind of trouble that they are in the cities. That's not totally true.
No.
But we say as a whole, it's more true.
Well, Adam and Eve sinned in the garden.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now, Adah, one of the wives of Lamech, bore Jabal. He was the ancestor of those who dwelt in tents and amidst herds. So, some farming came back to the Cain line because Cain didn't watch herds. And here these people are watching herds. And then the name of his brother was Juval, and he was the ancestor of all who played the lyre and the pipe organ. So they also started music. And so what we're seeing is a progression to more civilization.
I mean, music is such a beautiful thing, but to think that it came from Cain.
Yeah. Well, and as for Zillah, that was the other wife. She bore Tubal-Cain, who forged all implements of copper and iron.
Yeah, which we use tools today for everything, you know.
And so that was the start of what they call the Iron Age. And these are all progressions towards what we have today. So now Lamech brags about a lad bruising him, and that if Cain is avenged sevenfold and Lamech 77, he slayed a man for wounding him. It wasn't equal. That's what is bad. And so they drop off the life of Cain's line at that point. I don't know if it's the last. Lamech was the last one in his generation, but we know that all of his people actually were gone by the flood. Or they died with the flood.
Who?
Cain's.
Oh, Cain's, yeah.
Now, verse 425 says, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, meaning God has provided me another offspring in the place of Abel.
Well, just going back to verse 24, if Cain suffered vengeance at 7 generations and Lamech at 77, do you think there were 77 generations before the flood?
I didn't gather that it said that. Avenge sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold.
Oh, it doesn't say.
In other words, I can go out and indiscriminately kill, and nothing's going to happen to me.
Oh.
That's the way I take it.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so we find out later, this word shet means given. I've never heard that word for given either. So that's where they get the idea that he was replacing Abel.
Okay.
And Seth, in turn, or Shet, in Hebrew it's Set. Sorry. Oh, Shet. Yeah. If I looked at the Hebrew, that would be a shin, not a sin. And to Shet, in turn, a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that men began to invoke the name of Hashem by name. I don't know if that means they're trying to pronounce his name or not. But they're calling on him for help, apparently. Let's see what Prager says on this. The Torah posits here that the first people to have a relationship with the divine believed in one God. Accordingly, monotheism was not a specifically Jewish revolution because it predated Abraham. The Jewish revolution was ethical monotheism. So he's just saying that they believed in God, but not necessarily had a group consciousness yet.
Does this imply that Adam and Eve were no longer believing in God?
No, I don't think so. Some of his descendants may not.
Yeah, but why does it say here for this?
Oh, no, I think they believed in God. They just didn't know all the laws that should govern man.
This means then, in the stone it says, then to call in the name of Hashem became profaned.
Yours says profaned. The word profaned could be taken that way. The word profane is not in the translation. What verse is that again?
That's verse 26, the last verse of the chapter.
Let's read it in this translation, my favorite one. And to him also was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the Lord by name. It doesn't say profane.
That's better than, yeah. All right. But that implies that before that, people hadn't been calling on him.
Because Adam and Eve could still talk to God face to face, like they did in the garden.
I think Abel talked to God.
Abel and Cain also did. Mm-hmm. But when they get down another generation or two here, then, and we'll find out, Shet was born quite a few years later. After Abel was gone.
Yeah, we don't know how long.
Well, some say it's 125 years. Let's see. This is a record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. 5:1. This intimates that the men born to Adam are made in the likeness of Adam. Female and male, he created them. Prager has a real thing about this, male and female. He says the Torah states God's creation of human beings into two distinct groups, male and female. This is the only distinction the Torah makes in describing the creation of human being. Mm-hmm. In other words, everything else is common to man.
It's 10 hours.
Characteristics are common to man and woman. And that if there's going to be any division of mankind, it's male and female, not race.
Yeah.
And it's also reminds us that men and women are equally important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And so that's another good reason to emphasize that.
Well, the animals are male and female.
Yeah.
And when he gave a command to multiply and replenish the earth, he couldn't have given that command unless there was male and female.
That's right.
It takes male and female to produce children.
Yeah.
Gay couples cannot produce children.
Right.
They can adopt children, but they can't produce children.
Yeah. So 5:2 says, and when they were created, he blessed them and called them man, which means many times the word Adam in Hebrew, especially here at the beginning, means mankind.
Right.
And it does in other places in the Torah. When Adam had lived 130 years, he begot a son in his likeness after his image, and he named him Seth. That is verse 3 of chapter 5. So that's where they get that Seth was born about 125 years after Abel.
Oh, okay.
And they have some midrash, which means a story, that Adam left his wife after the two kids were gone. He was so upset about this. I don't know the story real well. I just know this. I've read it. And then he came back to her, and that's when they had Seth. But he's not made in the likeness of God as such. He's made in Adam's image. So that tells us that in order to have the image, to be in the image of God, there is a progression back to finding God and to coming out of this place where God is hidden. And we become in the image of God. We take on more of God's characteristics. That's what I'm getting out of that. What do you think, Frank?
Yeah. So you're saying because he begot his likeness and his image, he named him Set. It was the likeness and the image of Adam.
Right, that's what it says.
And isn't every child that way, in the image of their father? But Set means what again? What does Set mean?
What did I say it meant? It was a word that I've never. Give. That's what it says. He says it means.
So that name doesn't seem to relate to the words his image.
No.
And likeness. Okay.
No. I'm not going to read all the names here. There's not. They all lived a long time. They gave birth sometimes at 162, for instance. But we've got Enoch, but that's not the one that walks with God. Well, maybe it is. Oh yeah, in his Bible he doesn't call it Hanok. He calls it Enoch, which is the way that English would have pronounced it without the H, because the Cockney English leaves H's off at the beginning. So it comes out Enoch instead of Hanok. Anyway, Enoch lived 65 years and he begot Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah,
What verse again?
verse 21, I'm sorry. 21.
Of chapter 5.
Yeah, and he lived 65 years and he begot Methuselah. Verse 22, after the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and he begot sons and daughters. That means during the 300 years, he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch came to 365 years. Two reasons, this is what Prager says, 2 reasons stand out for genealogies. Both contrast the Torah with its contemporaneous pagan societies. First, other ancient Near East genealogies depict man gods, but there are no man gods in Torah. All the genealogies from Adam forward are human beings. So he's saying that's the reason why it says they were born in the image of Adam. Okay? Because there were no man gods. So if you back up, then wouldn't that make Adam a man god? He didn't say that.
Yeah.
Second, the other genealogies list kings. The Torah's genealogies do not. It is the Torah's way of saying every individual human being matters, not just royalty. The Torah cannot be appreciated without first understanding how utterly different it was morally and theologically from the values of its time. Is one reason the Torah should be regarded like creation, something from nothing. In other words, from God, who is no thing, he's not a thing, came words, and this created the Torah. So nothing existed before creation, and nothing like the Torah exists before the Torah. Anyway, verse 24, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, for God took him.
Yeah, boy.
We are given no details about Enoch's life, but he was clearly special. Like Noah, Enoch is described as having walked with God. That's a phrase that's used for Noah.
Mm-hmm.
The term is used only 3 times in the Bible. And along with Elijah the prophet, Enoch is one person of whom it is not said that he died, but God took him.
Very few examples. Only Enoch and Elijah, as far as I know, that didn't die.
Okay, now people like to say the garden was paradise, and that we go to paradise when we die.
Yeah.
Okay, paradise still existed on the earth until the flood.
Right. Yeah.
So where did Enoch go with God? He went back to the garden. And there are, like, if you read
did he die there?
Yashar, no,
Did
I
he
don't
die
think.
in
No, that's where you got to live.
Did he die in the flood?
No, I don't think he was in the flood. God took him, and that's the end. You don't know any more about him.
But if he went into paradise, which is on the earth, you said paradise was there until the flood.
Then he must have been translated into another
Okay.
realm. What was I going to say?
Sorry.
Something about that. It's the book of Jasher.
Oh yeah.
That means straight talk. They have more of a story about Enoch. And of course,
you might explain a little bit about. Some people don't know what the book of Jasher is.
The book of Jasher is mentioned in Samuel and another book.
Yeah.
I can't remember which. But there's a lot of elaboration in Jasher about these stories.
And it's available in English now.
Yes, and the Jews don't think it's necessarily true, but when I read some of their stories, they look like they've been lifted right out of the book of Jasher.
Yeah.
So anyway, they have and this is where the book of Jude in the New Testament gets some of its ideas from, probably from the book of Enoch and Jasher, that Enoch came from time to time from the garden or from paradise to the people on the rest of the earth.
Okay.
And preached to them righteousness.
Interesting.
And he ends up taking a bunch of people with him into paradise.
Oh, wow. So
because they reached that level of righteousness.
So that means there were others who didn't die then.
That could be. And it might be a clue as to what happens later. We don't know for sure. There's lots of things we don't know. We like to guess, but we don't know. We just know that if you walk with God, like Enoch did, you'll get to walk into paradise.
Well, there's rewards.
There's a reward regardless of where you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what God wants us to do.
Yeah. So Methuselah is the longest living one, and then we come down to Lamech in verse 28. He lived 182 years and begot a son, and his name was Noah, which means comfort. And that's why it says, this one will provide release from our work and from the toil of our hands, out of the very soil which the Lord placed under a curse. So he's reiterating again here that the soil got cursed because of Adam's sin.
Boy.
So Lamech only lived 595 years after the birth of Noah, and he also begot sons and daughters. That's lots of sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech, this is not the same Lamech that came from Cain.
Okay.
There's two Lamechs.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that they ended with his line with the Lamech, and they're ending the line with of Adam on this one. All the days of Lamech came to 770 years, and then he died. So if there were any righteous people besides Noah up to that point, they're all gone, including Adam. So now we'll explain the length of the time, the hundreds of years the individuals listed lived. There are three possible explanations. The ages at which these individuals died are literally true, and we cannot explain them. 2, this is the Prager commentary. The numbers mean something other than in or in addition to a literal number of years. This is common in the Torah. For example, the number 40 signifies a significant period of time, one in which God is involved. The 40 days of the flood, the 40 years of the Israelites in the wilderness, 40 days and nights of Moses on the mountaintop, and it goes on and on. Astrophysicists, and this is number 3, and theologian Hugh Roche maintains the key to understanding these long ages is when God limited how long human beings could live. He did so immediately after the flood. God's preoccupation throughout the Torah is with goodness. That is the reason he destroyed the world. The world was engulfed in evil. Obviously, the longer people live, the more time they have to commit evil and to spread evil ideas.
Mm-hmm.
While God originally intended man to live many years, God's concern with the triumph of good over evil meant years people could live had to be drastically reduced. So in a sense, this third way is going back to the first way, that it was actual years. And I think when God says, I'm going to reduce man's number of years to 120, it shows that he was living a long time, and now God's not going to allow it to happen. Okay, when 532, Noah lived 500 years and begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we get to chapter 6, and I think that's where we will stop so that we kind of have a break here. And I don't plan to do verse by verse through the flood, but I'm going to do a few verses here before, because people are always asking about these verses. And we can only guess. There's lots of ideas, but I have mine that I'll share.
Okay.
And we'll do that next week. So Lord bless you and have a good week.